My name is Kevin Samuels. I'm a professional men's and corporate image consultant. My job is to make sure my clients look good, smell great, and are the best version of themselves each and every day. Welcome back. For those of you who don't know, my name is Kevin Samuels. I'm a professional men's and corporate image consultant. My job is to make sure my clients look good, smell great, and are the best version of themselves each and every day. But who are we kidding? The reason you're here right now is because the term high value man seems to be everywhere. Full disclosure, I didn't create the term, guys. High value man has been with us for a long time. I have just put my own unique spin on it and kind of popularized it, and it has kind of gone viral. But here's the thing, so many people are talking about high value this, high value that. And many times they're actually talking about me and saying as though, well, Kevin said this or Kevin said that. And many people are getting it 100% wrong. So, in an attempt to make sense of all this, I want to give you guys the simple 6 basic principles that I define as being high value. Now, again, you don't have to agree with what I'm saying, but this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying a high value man. So, your mileage may vary, your opinion is your opinion, but when I'm talking about it, this is what I'm talking about. So let's get it started. First of all, let's go over some basic definitions. High, great, greater than normal in quantity, size, or intensity. Value, the regard of something held to deserve the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And man, an adult human male. So when you put all that together, what do you have? An adult human male that's greater than normal importance or usefulness to what? The group. Basic economic principle states that the value of something is what a market is willing to pay for it. The value is determined by what? The market. And when we're talking about individuals, the market is other people, men or women. So a high value man is completely determined by the market. Case in point, you can have a vehicle, a home, anything in your possession. You can hold it dear. It could be supremely important to you. But when you put it on the market decides. And there's an upper limit and a lower limit. It doesn't really matter if you think the low is too low or the high is not high enough. That's what the market is willing to pay for it, and that is its overall value. That has been with us forever. And when we start talking about that, we're dealing with people. It really throws people off because it seems so cold, so calculated. But like it or not, that's the way the world is. So let's get into this whole high value man thing. Number one, in order to be a high value man, it starts with money. Again, like it or not, I didn't put the six-figure thing out there. It's been with us since the mid 80s. And like it or not, that's where this whole thing starts. You can't be high value and homeless. So you have to make a certain amount of money. And the line is roughly at $10,000 a month adjusted for Atlanta dollars. If you live in San Francisco, LA, New York City, where the cost of living is higher than 100%, you need to adjust it. So $10,000 a month gets the starting point off for high value. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just giving you what the world gave me. Number two, that money needs to be made over a length of time, i.e. performance. And that's roughly about 5 years. And about the 3 year mark, you're kind of starting to scratch the surface. Why does it need to be 5 years? Well, because guys, it's a matter of consistency and stability. Look in the NFL, the NBA, anybody can have a great season, but having a great season does not automatically mean you're going to the Hall of Fame. They want to see consistent numbers over a period of time. You know how this works, just like I do in business. You can't be a one-hit wonder or have up here and down there. Consistency, performance over a length of time. That's why the 5 year mark is so important. Like I said, around 3 years, you're starting to scratch the surface, but at 5 years, people can pretty much count on you to say, this person understands and knows how to get it done. Number three is group acceptance. Like it or not, guys, high value man is like a fraternity. It's like a club, a secret society. And high value men know other high value men. They're welcoming men to the group. They know what it takes to be there. They know what it takes to get in there. And high value men, group acceptance is supremely important. Guys, secret societies, fraternities, organizations have always been with us. And you know how this just works in just general interaction. Guys that just make their own secret society or club, but it doesn't matter as much as somebody says that group is important. Guys, this is about separation. High value men tend to huddle around other high value men for reasons I'm going to go into a little bit later. But group acceptance is another critical component of being a high value man. Why is group acceptance so important? Because the next part, a network. You have to have a network of other high value men and others. This is another stumbling block for a lot of guys, for a lot of people, because they may have the money, even the length of time. They may look like they fit the group, but if they don't even have any other high value contacts or a network, a group of others, that person is going to be looked at with a side eye. Think of it like this. If you're sitting at the table with 10 high value men, and each of these 10 men has 50 contacts, that's 500 contacts. And you sit at the table and you have twice as much money as any other man on there, but you have zero contacts. What can you effectively get done other than throw money at it? These other men can make phone calls, exert influence, move things to get things done. And you can only do what? You can only do what? Offer money and potentially feed off that network of contact. One thing high value men know and understand, the time is what's important. And building a network that actually works for you is extremely important. In some areas, it's called a book of business. A book of business can make you successful here, here, and here. Your contacts, your network is your net worth. You've heard this before, so you cannot underestimate how important having a network of high value men and other people is to your status as a high value man. After the network, we got to have the visibility. Guys, your income and your position has to be LinkedIn level. Think of it like this. This person says they're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. This person is head of thoracic surgery at Johns Hopkins. This person is VP of Mergers and Acquisitions at Bank of America. And then someone says, "Hi, I'm an entrepreneur." Three of those four people, at a glance, we can pretty much estimate who they are, what they do, and their relative importance in the overall socioeconomic structure. The fourth person, more information is needed. There's not enough visibility, not enough transparency. To be a high value man, it needs to be at a glance. Again, your position and your income. Guys, you may have a lot of money, but if it's coming from sketchy areas, no one can kind of understand where it's coming from. That does not give other high value men or even the public any kind of real confidence that you are who you say you are. Again, guys, it's about the market. It's what the market, the world is thinking. They got to know at a glance that you are a high value man. And the sixth part is probably my favorite part, guys. A high value man is useful to others and the group. A lot of times you hear people say, "I don't want to be used. I don't want to be used." No, I want to be used. Why? Because that means I'm useful. High value men are in demand and useful. Their presence is felt when they're there, and their absence is felt when they're gone. That is how you know you're really a high value man. How you can move things, your ability to influence things, and that is your relative usefulness. In economics, it's called UTILs. How useful are you to the group? Again, there's no high value homeless, neither are there any high value loners. If you have all these resources, all this stuff, but it's all hoarded for your own selfish ends, and no one can benefit from your money, your network, or anything you have, how valuable are you to the group, to the world, to other people? That's what this comes down to. High value men are in demand and useful to other people. As I said at the beginning, high value is all the rage, all the buzz right now. I didn't make it, but I want to clarify what I mean when I'm talking about it. The six basic principles of being a high value man, and that by no means is the end of it. Each individual person, after that six basic things there, they maybe put other things on top of it. They may have religious concerns, personal motivations, but those six core things need to be there. Look at it this way. High value has been with us forever. There's always been a ranking system, irrespective of race, culture, period of time. You will see higher value men, higher value individuals separate or be separated from the pack. That is how this works. You don't have to like it, but you do need to accept it. High value men understand that the world is a competitive place. All span love and war, right? And high value does two things for men. It gives you more options and it gives you an opportunity to get more favorable outcomes. If you want more options or more favorable outcomes, you need to increase your overall value. And that principle is pretty well understood everywhere except when it comes to us. It gets personal, it gets hard, it gets difficult. And some of us don't like to reduce human beings for things that are so seemingly cold and calculated. But like it or not, that is what it is. We have civilized the world in general, we have evolved, but at the end of the day, we still had that primitive brain, that hunter gatherer, fight or flight. And even though in the suit and all that other kind of stuff, that is who we are when it's right down to it. Better to know that exists and then ask yourself, what do you want to do about it? Than try to fight against this whole thing of high value or not high value. Last things, just because you're not a high value man does not mean you lack value or you're of no value. And just because you may not be supremely useful to the group does not mean you're useless. High value is not a way of saying these guys are great and these guys are nothing, but it is a mark, a delineation, and it is a fact of life. It comes into play when men are dealing with men and when women are dealing with men. You can't get over it, guys, so you might as well understand it and act accordingly. Till the next time, your Godfather is out.
Peace and blessings, my brother. Peace and blessings to you. The man professor is in the house once again. Good to see you guys. Good to see you guys. Good to see you. May Kevin Samuels rest in peace. May our brother who was with us and left his memory and imprint on the world, may he rest in power. Guys, I am happy to be with you all tonight because we're going to have a very spirited exchange about none other. Y'all see the thumbnail. You guys see the thumbnail. You guys see the thumbnail. And I must tell you guys, and I must be forward with you. I've been planning on doing this for a long time. I've been planning on doing this for over a year now. I didn't know quite when I would talk about Clarence Thomas. I've talked about the Supreme Court. I talked about the court when the court overturned Roe v. Wade. And I talked about all the justices, and I said some things about Clarence Thomas at that time, but that broadcast was primarily about the Supreme Court. So if you guys have not seen my live stream from last year on the Supreme Court, I suggest that you go back and you check out that live stream. But tonight, we have to talk about this man. We have to talk about a man who is, and this is not up for debate. This is not up for debate. This is not up for debate. This is a matter of fact. And I say this to you guys as someone who is not a huge fan of Clarence Thomas. I will be honest with you, and I will say this to you directly, that I am not a huge fan of Clarence Thomas. But facts are facts. History is history. Value is value. There are some things that are beyond debate. And one thing that is not up for debate is the fact that Clarence Thomas, the Justice Clarence Thomas, who has sat on the United States Supreme Court since 1991, who was appointed by George Herbert Walker Bush, Clarence Thomas is one of, or if not, the most powerful Black men in the history of the United States. I'm going to say this again, that Clarence Thomas is one of the most powerful black men in the history of the United States. I can talk more generally and say he is one of the most powerful men ever in the history of the United States, but I want to qualify it because this is a black man's channel and we talk about black man's issues, we talk about black man's concerns. He is one of the most powerful black men that this country, the United States, has ever produced. It doesn't matter how you feel about him. And I don't have to tell you that a lot of people have all sorts of feelings about him. I'm just gonna say this directly. A lot of black people. This is a man who has been derided. This is a man who has been vilified. This is a man who has been painted as a traitor, as a sellout. He's been called an Uncle Tom. He has been demonized, particularly by Black Americans. He has been particularly demonized by Black Americans from his generation. Clarence Thomas was born in 1948 in the state of Georgia. And Clarence Thomas is well into his seventh decade. He is one of the most controversial. He is one of the most polarizing, one of the most perplexing political figures that the United States has ever produced. And here we are in 2023. Here we are in 2023. Clarence Thomas is in the news, as he has been over the past 30 years, but Clarence Thomas continues to find himself in the news. And he finds himself consistently in the news because of his tenure on the United States Supreme Court, and because of his influence as a Supreme Court justice, because of the many judicial opinions that he has written and articulated from his seat as a Supreme Court justice. He is the senior justice. John Roberts is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. But it is understood right now in 2023 that the intellectual and the ideological weight and gravity of the Supreme Court begins and darn near ends with Clarence Thomas. And in the title, I say that Clarence Thomas is the untouchable, high-value black man. He is the untouchable, high-value black man. Let me tell you guys, I am heading into my 5th decade, and I can tell you that I remember watching George Herbert Walker Bush nominate Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court in 1991. And I can tell you that I remember watching vividly the confirmation hearings related to Clarence Thomas's nomination. I can tell you vividly that I remember all of the chatter, what was being said in the media by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, what was being said by Emerge Magazine, the black publications, what was being said on Black Entertainment Television, what was being said all over America. And this was before the internet became what it is right now. This is before social media. This is before the world that we live in right now. I remember everything so vividly. I remember the drama. I remember all of the theater that was connected to Clarence Thomas's nomination. The great Thurgood Marshall had retired from the bench. Thurgood Marshall, that stalwart figure of civil rights, the man who had been called Mr. Civil Rights. Thurgood Marshall, who was at the time of his retirement the most liberal judge, the most liberal justice on the Supreme Court. Marshall, who had argued before the Supreme Court in their landmark case called Brown v. Board of Education. Marshall was nominated by Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he was later confirmed, and he sat on that court from the time in which he was nominated at the end of the 1960s until the time that he retired from the bench in 1991. And Clarence Thomas, when he was nominated, and this was a major appointment because Marshall had been the only black person on the bench on the high court, and there was much concern about who would replace him. And there was much concern about whether his replacement would be either another black American or someone else. And I remember when Clarence Thomas was selected by George Herbert Walker Bush. Clarence Thomas, someone who had been a hardcore Reaganite. Clarence Thomas, who had been very public about his political views, his political conservatism. Clarence Thomas, a man who had graduated from Holy Cross College and who also graduated from Yale Law School. Clarence Thomas, who worked for a Republican Attorney General out of Missouri, Jack Danforth, as a clerk. Clarence Thomas, who was appointed the head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. Clarence Thomas, who was later appointed to the federal bench. He spent 1 year as a federal judge. Clarence Thomas was someone who everyone knew about. They knew his politics. He was a conservative. He was on the right. And I'm going to tell you guys, as someone who was there, many of you guys were there. I'm not the only one. Many of you guys were there too. You guys who were in your 40s, you were there. Some of you guys who were in your 30s, you might have been whippersnappers, little kids watching it from TV as a little kid. And then you boomer guys, I know you boomer guys were there, so I don't have to really say too much about that. All you boomer guys. But no one predicted, no one anticipated what Clarence Thomas would become when he was officially confirmed to the United States Supreme Court in 1991. No one had any clue as to what he would be decades later, as perhaps one of the most powerful jurists, black men that this country, the United States of America, has ever produced. Clarence Thomas is a high value man. I played that clip. Let me show my face, guys. What's going on my phone? I played that clip. The fuck? I'm back. Y'all still with me? Something happened. Somebody don't like this right here. I hope you guys are still with me. I got something happened to my connection. Something happened to my connection, but I'm back. I'm back. My connection. Something happened to my connection. I don't know what happened. But here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. Kevin Samuels, rest his memory, outlined, and I played a clip from Kevin Samuels as the intro to this stream. And Kevin Samuels outlined six things. Y'all share, y'all like and subscribe. 6 things that make a high valued man. 6 things that make a high value man. 6 things. Number 1, he talked about money. You got to have money. And his standard, his beginning was $100,000 a year. Number 2, you have to have time. There's length of time. That's number 2. Number 2, the length of time. You have to be someone who has a record of being high value. Number 3, you have to have this thing what he calls group acceptance. You have to be accepted by your group of other high value men. Number 4, he talks about having a network. Number 5, he talks about visibility. That's what he talks about, being LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. And then number 6, you have to have utility to the group. You have to have utility. You have to have utility to the group. You have to be useful to the group. Now, if you have not already seen the PBS video or documentary on Clarence Thomas and his wife, Ginni Thomas, I suggest you guys go ahead and watch that documentary on Clarence Thomas and Ginni Thomas, okay? There is another documentary called Supreme Revenge, and it deals with Supreme Court issues related to abortion, the appointments of Donald Trump. Donald Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices during his tenure as the 45th president of the United States. And that documentary deals with the power of the Senate, Republicans in the Senate, and it really deals with the way in which political conservatives have worked over a long period of time to stack the Supreme Court with people who think like them, okay? So y'all watch those documentaries. Clarence Thomas is a black man. Clarence Thomas has a story, which is a black man's story. Regardless of where you land politically, regardless of whether you agree with him or not, it is still a black man's story. A black man's story that has many lessons. Many lessons for black men and for the world. I'm not going to approach Clarence Thomas, and you should tell this. You should be able to tell this at this point. I don't approach Clarence Thomas from the perspective of many of his critics. I don't approach Clarence Thomas from the standpoint of people in his generation who call him all sorts of names or what have you. Clarence Thomas has origins. He has origins that are not unfamiliar to all of us. Clarence Thomas has a background. Clarence Thomas has gone through struggles. Clarence Thomas has had a history in terms of finding your way in America that is not unfamiliar to most of us as Black American men. It's not unfamiliar, okay? There is a theory, or there are theories that are in the air, speculative theories. And what I mean by that is that there are people who, based on speculation on his life, would suggest that many of his positions, that who he is right now and who he has been over the past 30 years, in terms of how he has dealt with the United States Constitution, in terms of how he thinks about civil rights, the way he thinks about so-called personal liberties, the way he thinks about liberalism, where he thinks about just being a justice. There are those who suggest that the key to Clarence Thomas's justice and his views are rooted and stemmed in the tumultuous nature of his life and the negative experiences that he has had to endure, particularly when he was a young man. That Clarence Thomas is the product, he was the product of a single parent household. Clarence Thomas did not have any real relationship with his biological father. Clarence Thomas was not raised by his biological mother. Clarence Thomas's mother was a woman who had a problem with stability. His mother had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. And because she was unable to take care of her children, Pinpoint, Georgia, because of her lack of stability, she sent Clarence and his brother to go live with her father, his maternal grandfather, and his grandmother. And he was raised in the rural South in Pinpoint, Georgia, near Savannah. He was raised near Savannah. In a very impoverished and darn near third world environment. And his family situation, having to be raised by his grandmother and his grandfather being the patriarch, his grandfather being a farmer, a small business owner, a man who believed in the Second Amendment, a deeply, deeply, deeply conservative man, a man who was a Catholic, a man who was a no-nonsense Black man of his age. That these are the seeds. These are the seeds. And this documentary on PBS on Clarence Thomas and his wife, it goes into it to a certain degree. It's not a very, it's a 2-hour documentary, but if you want to If you want to learn more, there are books that have been written about Clarence Thomas. There's one book that you might want to read. One book right here is called, this book came out in 2007. It's called Supreme Discomfort, The Divided Soul of Clarence Thomas. This came out in 2006. 2006. A more recent book that came out is The Enigma of Clarence Thomas, which came out in 2020. This came out in 2020. This is called The Enigma of Clarence Thomas he's a political scientist, Corey Robin. And there's a book which came out also 2020, which deals with Clarence Thomas and the Lost Constitution by Myron Magnet. These are just a few books that deal with Clarence Thomas's life. And let me just go straight for the jugular, guys. Go straight for the jugular. Clarence Thomas is a political conservative, and his political conservatism is one that is born out of his Southern experience, growing up in the rural South, growing up in a deeply punitive patriarchal household. It's a conservatism that is shaped by Catholicism. Clarence Thomas was raised as a Roman Catholic. Clarence Thomas went to Catholic schools. He was trained by nuns. If you know anything about Catholic education, a Catholic education represents perhaps the highest quality of education that has probably existed in the history of this country. Catholics do an extraordinary job. The Catholic Church has done an extraordinary job over the centuries in educating people, particularly people who are poor, people who are marginalized, people who are deemed, the wretched of the earth, those on the outskirts of society. The Catholic Church has done a yeoman's job in terms of education, particularly K through 12 education. Catholic education is better than public education. So his Catholicism is connected to his conservatism. His conservatism is connected to a larger stream of conservatism that Black people have participated in, that you can take back to someone like a Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, the Wizard of Tuskegee. Black man who ran an institution for decades in Macon, Alabama. Booker T. Washington, who has been vilified, who has been undervalued and underappreciated historically by so many. Because Booker T. Washington preached a philosophy of self-help and self-determination. Booker T. Washington was someone who did not think that voting and voting rights or political rights, the political franchise by itself, would be sufficient in empowering Black Americans. Booker T. Washington was not deeply invested in protest and agitation. Unlike his younger critic, W.E.B. Du Bois, and so many other people, Booker T. Washington believed that Black people needed to take capitalism seriously. That capitalism and mastering capitalism, particularly industrial capitalism, was the key to African American advancement. You all know the story of Booker T. Washington. So Booker T. Washington was a god among many Black people. And Clarence Thomas inherited that legacy. And what we also find out is that Clarence Thomas, building on that legacy, embraced a much more radical type of, maybe some might say conservatives, you might call it nationalism or even Black nationalism. He adopted a different type of Black nationalism, which has conservative varieties. Some regard Black nationalism as a conservative orientation, and to a certain degree, it is a conservative orientation. If you regard conservatism as something that is not animated by the franchise, that is the government, that the government is going to be the exclusive mechanism for the empowerment of Black people. It's important to understand that Clarence Thomas is profoundly shaped by the world that existed before the so-called Civil Rights Revolution. They call it the Rights Revolution or the Rights Revolution. He was profoundly shaped by Jim Crow, profoundly shaped by apartheid, profoundly shaped by segregation. Clarence Thomas is also a product of anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness, anti-Blackness, anti-Blackness. What do you mean, Dr. Neal? So when you look at this documentary, guys, I'm talking about this documentary. When you look at this documentary, the documentary is really trying to make sense of who this person is right now. It's trying to make sense of who he is with his wife, Ginni Thomas. Right now, we're talking about two figures. You're talking about a white man, a Black man, and a white woman who are regarded as royalty. They are regarded as royalty in the world of political conservatism. They are royalty. They are the creme de la creme. Okay, guys. Let me tell you something, guys. I picked up Ron DeSantis' book. I picked up Ron DeSantis' book the other day. He has a book. It's called The Courage to Be Free. And in his book, he says his two American heroes. He has two American heroes. His first American hero is Ronald Reagan. His second American hero is Clarence Thomas. Ronald Reagan, Clarence Thomas, those are the heroes of Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis is not the only prominent political conservative whom I've heard name Clarence Thomas as their own personal hero. But this documentary traces the journey. They're tracing his journey. And when you look at Clarence Thomas, you have to look at the scars and the wounds that this man has acquired over the course of his life. One of the themes, here's the theme guide. One of the major theme that stands out in this documentary is the theme of rejection or alienation. That's a major theme. I want y'all to get this. Thomas is painted as a guy who has always seen himself as a kind of outsider. Thomas has always seen himself as somebody who was never a part of the in group. And the fact of the matter, it wasn't just a matter of perception. Clarence Thomas was not a part of the in group. Clarence Thomas was never accepted by the cool kids. Clarence Thomas has endured much rejection over the course of his lifetime. And the rejection that he has endured goes back to his boyhood when he was a child. On one level, he had to deal with the rejection of white people. He had to deal with alienation coming from white people. And you see this when he goes to school. You see this when he goes to Catholic schools. You see this when he goes to a seminary. He was going to study to be a priest. He deals with rejection from white people, but he also deals with rejection from black people. That's the major theme. Alienation. You know what Clarence Thomas looks like. You know what he looks like. You know what type of facial features he has. You know what he represents in the imagination. Clarence Thomas was picked on. Clarence Thomas was mocked. Clarence Thomas was ridiculed because of how he looked, because of his dark skin, because of his wide nose, because of his facial features. Clarence Thomas was ostracized because he looked African. This is a man who is indistinguishably African rather. And this documentary deals with stuff that lots of black people don't really like talking about. It's a lot of stuff that black people don't like talking about. You know, you have the black females. The black females, y'all share, y'all like, and subscribe. You know, you have black women all over the internet, all over the social media, dark-skinned black females who talk about colorism. Colorism. You have colorism. Some people call them colorism crybabies. You got colorism crybabies. He's always talking about colorism. You got black females, black women who have whole YouTube channels on colorism. You got Rashida Strober. I don't know if she still makes content. You had Rashida Strober video after video, and she called herself a colorism activist. And I know women personally, black women, dark-skinned black women personally, who have wrestled with and struggled with their complexion. Y'all know them. I'm going to tell y'all. But when these black women talk about colorism, they tend to talk about colorism as though colorism is something that only affects black women. These black women, y'all share, y'all like, and y'all subscribe. If you like this ism, if you like this Hit the Cash App. Y'all know the Cash App. Hit the Super Chat. These women who talk about colorism talk as though colorism is something that is exclusive to them. That it's only something that women deal with. It's a phenomenon that women deal with. But colorism is something that black men, and when you talk, black men deal with. And when you talk about a particular moment in time, you talk about somebody who was born in the 1940s, like Clarence Thomas. You talk about somebody who grew up in Georgia, and here's the thing. He grows up, he's in Pinpoint. He goes to Savannah, Georgia. Savannah is on the coast. You've got the coast, which is next to South Carolina. You've got the Gullah. He's all in the Gullah area. He's in the Geechee area. He's in my neck of the woods. I'm a Geechee. I'm Geechee. Ronald Neal, Dr. Neal, Professor Neal, the man professor is Geechee. I'm a Geechee. Because I got Florida, Georgia roots. I'm a Geechee. I'm a Geechee. Clarence Thomas is a Geechee. He's a Georgia Geechee. And in those areas, along the coast, you got Savannah, then you go to South Carolina, where you had the slave ports. They were the port of entry. In South Carolina, you had the Charleston slave port, which was the first port of entry, one of the main port of entries for bringing slaves into North America from the western part of Africa. And many of those slaves were black, 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 black. And what you find when you're dealing with the low country of South Carolina, or you're dealing with various parts of Georgia, particularly Savannah, in that area, in the part where he's from, the most African, what you can find is some of the most African influences in the United States in terms of pigmentation, in terms of phenotype and the like. Y'all know I told y'all I went to Senegal. Y'all see my baby from Senegal. My pictures, I went to Senegal. You go to Senegal, and in Senegal, you see some of the darkest black people that you'll ever see. Some of the most beautifully black people that you'll ever see on the west coast of Africa, and west, Senegal. You go to Gambia, you'll see some of the most beautiful black people. You see the most beautiful black women that you'll ever see. They black, they dark skin, all that dark skin. You like you some dark skin. If you're a black man, I know some men, you know, you like dark skin. Some of y'all like light skin, and that's cool. I mean, I do the whole spectrum. I do the entire spectrum. I do the entire spectrum, but there are some complexions that sometimes can be more seductive than other complexions. And there are some men who are attracted to dark skin. But what the point I'm trying to make is that the part of Georgia that he came from had a lot of black there, a lot of black. But not only did it have a lot of black there, it had a lot of light. It had a lot of orange. It had people who were my complexion. You see my complexion, I'm in between. I'm in between. You see, my father, whose parents are from Mississippi, he's from Chicago. You see, my father was dark skinned. My father dark, super black. My mother was light, mulatto. My mother was a mulatto. She was super light. And I'm a mixture between both of them. But let me get back to Clarence Thomas. Colorism. You had a hierarchy there because remember, in that part of Georgia, you had slavery, you had race mixing, and you had an internal hierarchy among Black Americans. You had the light skin, dark skin hierarchy there. And before civil rights, that light skin, dark skin hierarchy among Black people was very, very deep, and it was very, very pernicious. It represented a class hierarchy, a class. And I have to explain to y'all, light skin denoted that you were a part of a different class than people who were dark skinned. If you were light skinned and you had more European features, you were something different from people like Clarence Thomas, who was deeply Black, who had deeply African features. When you read his book, he wrote a memoir. Clarence Thomas wrote a memoir that came out in 2007 called My Grandfather's Son. And in that memoir, he says that he had negroid. He had negroid features. Negroid. That's the word he used. But that's the word that they used. That's the word that the anthropologists used in the early part of the 20th century. They used the term negroid. Y'all know what it is. At any rate, so we're talking about a man who had a deep color consciousness, and had deep scars because he was picked on for being Black. Not only was he picked on for being Black, he was picked on for having these Black African features. And those experiences being picked on and being ostracized and ridiculed, they left marks on him. They left real marks on him. And he felt he felt excluded in a very, very major way. So here's the thing, guys. For the people who call Clarence Thomas Two Coons and Uncle Tom and all that kind of stuff, here's the thing. This is a man who was treated badly, not only by white people. This is a man who was treated badly by Black people. Let's just be honest. Clarence Thomas was treated horribly by Black people. And one of the things that comes out in this documentary is that he was treated horribly. He was treated horribly by Black females. He was treated horribly by Black females. So this was a man who never had a tribe. This was a man who never fit in. And he made some attempts to fit in. He made some attempts to find his tribe. The documentary talks about it. This is the books as well. Clarence Thomas had negative experiences with white people at Holy Cross and Yale. It was during his experiences at Holy Cross that this society had basically exploded with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. And it was during that period that Clarence Thomas had joined with Black nationalist groups. He had become a Black Panther. He was a part of the Black Panther Party. Clarence Thomas had got married. Clarence Thomas had a son while he was in college. This was a time when people got married when they were in college. Clarence Thomas threw himself into the writings of Malcolm X. Clarence Thomas memorized the speeches of Malcolm X. He became a student. He became a disciple of Malcolm X. And that's basically who the Black Panthers were. The Black Panthers they were the disciples of Malcolm X. They were basically the children of Malcolm X. That's what the Black Panthers were, the children of Malcolm X. But Clarence Thomas's affiliation with the Black Panther Party and with radical politics didn't last long. It did not last long. And the documentary doesn't go into it, but in the other books it goes into it. Other books do. Being a radical, being someone who was completely oppositional to society, being oppositional to law and order and structure and all that kind of stuff, deep down in his soul, that wasn't who he was as a person. So deep down in his soul, he wasn't somebody who was just driven by an anti-authoritarian impulse. Now, I just laid the background. I've laid these seeds because, see, no one talks about this. No one talks about this when it comes down to Clarence Thomas. No one talks about the formative elements which have contributed to who he is right now. No one, people don't talk about it. They don't talk about the fact that this is a man who struggled to find a place, a tribe, where he can rest his hat. This is one person who's dealt with lots and lots of alienation. And when you look at his story and you look at the documentary, guys, and you look at his documentary, this documentary here, and you read other places, one thing that you learn. So Clarence Thomas had some ambivalence. Clarence Thomas was not only ambivalent about radical politics, radical Black politics. The impulses of radical Black politics just weren't what he was all about. So he had to kind of move beyond it. But he had some problems with just general liberalism, political liberalism, general political liberalism. And what political liberalism had sold and was selling to Black America. He had some problems with what political liberalism was selling in his mind to Black America. And what exactly did he think liberalism sold to Black America? Liberalism sold government paternalism. That is, liberalism in his mind treated Black Americans as children who needed a governmental parent. And he was someone who came to the conclusion that that type of paternalism undermined self-reliance, Black self-reliance, It undermined Black respectability. It undermined Black dignity. It undermined Black agency. I'm going to tell you the event, the thing that really turned him away from liberalism. The thing that turned him away from liberalism is when he graduated from Yale Law School. Clarence Thomas graduated from Yale Law School. He had a law degree. He had a law degree from Yale Law School. And he thought that he would be able to go into the corporate sector and become an attorney, to become a litigator, to work in corporate law and make lots of money. And this was after he had graduated from Yale Law School. And his aspirations were met. Upon his graduation, his aspirations were met with the real world. The real world. That is that with his law degree in hand, he attempted to get employment with his Yale degree to law firms, Northeastern law firms that hire Yale graduates. And he ran into a brick wall. He was unable to get employment. He had a hard time getting employment after earning this degree from this institution, this prestigious Ivy League institution. And that experience right there caused him to really reassess in his own way the liberal ideology that had been feeding Black Americans. That liberal ideology that had been fed to Black Americans, that is. That's what happened. So it was okay for liberals, it was okay for him to get a degree at a law school where you got some liberals there. It was okay to go to the Northeast, which is seemingly more liberal than the South. It's okay to be there, even though they had riots and everything like that. And yeah, there was racism there. Of course, there was racism there. But when the rubber hit the road and it was time for him to get a job, liberal ideology was proven to be fraudulent. It did not extend beyond the school. And so his first opportunities were extended to him not from the world of the liberal. Let me say this again. Clarence Thomas's first opportunities were extended to him not from the world of the liberal, but from the world of the conservative. Clarence Thomas's first professional opportunities were due to doors that had been opened by a conservative Republican politician from Missouri, Jack Danforth. And if you want to understand his journey into conservatism, you have to start, well, I'm going to say you have to start right there, but his deeper journey into conservatism, white conservatism in particular, you have to look at the opportunity, the door that had been opened to him by a conservative Republican person who was the Attorney General for the state of Missouri, John Danforth. And when you look at that moment, what you'll discover is that it begins with John Danforth, his opportunities, and then he gets further opportunities. through the Reagan administration, in the Bush administration, which eventually lands him to the United States Supreme Court. So Clarence Thomas connects himself to a group of people who, based on the high value scale, became a network. It became a network. Clarence Thomas found acceptance, strangely, not among the liberals. Clarence Thomas found acceptance among conservatives. Conservatives opened doors for him. Conservatives promoted him. Conservatives became his tribe. That's in large part, not only, but in large part, why he threw himself into political conservatism, because they're the ones who opened the doors for him in terms of employment. Now, many argue against this point. Many argue against this point and will say that the reason why Clarence Thomas was able to go to Holy Cross, the reason why he was able to go to Yale, even though he didn't get any jobs in the liberal world, the reason why he was able to go to Holy Cross and the reason why he was able to go to Yale was not because of conservatism. It was because of the pressure that liberalism and radicalism had placed on those institutions. That's why he was able to go to Holy Cross. That's why he was able to go to Yale. That's the other side of the argument. And that's an argument that's been made and will continue to be made over and over again. And it's a very plausible argument. It's a very, very plausible argument. It's very plausible. I see you be about peace and pleasure. You say, I spoke with an attorney, a white attorney last night. He grew up poor. He admitted that the system made it easy for him to advance. Yeah. White man admitted white supremacy racism. Yeah, they know it. A lot of them know it. They know it exists. They know it exists. Now, here's the thing, guys. Here's the thing. Clarence Thomas, when he becomes an adult and he is in the world, as he's moving into adulthood and as he moves into the world of work, he undergoes a transformation. And he comes to the conclusion that the civil rights revolution had gone too far. It had gone too far in terms of its efforts to protect Black Americans through the government, through the state. He had reached the conclusion that there was too much government overreach. And that through the Great Society in particular, thank you, be about peace and pleasure. Thank you. Particularly the Great Society programs. Here's the thing. That there had been too much intrusion of the government into the private affairs of Black people through government programs. Welfare in particular and social services. And he's made an argument that many have made for decades now. Many have made the argument for decades. And it's a plausible argument. It's hard to refute. That the welfare state paid poor Black people to remain poor. The welfare state paid poor people to be poor and to remain poor and to be patrons of the state. And that the welfare system was a deterrence for many Black people's participation in the market. Because when you pay people to be poor and to remain poor, you take them out of the market. And you tell them that they don't have to engage the market. And you tell them that they don't have to be competitors and to compete in the market. I got a cash app. I got a cash app for Nana. Thank you for sending that cash app, Nana. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Not only did it pay poor people to remain poor, but it disrupted family norms. It disrupted family life. It removed the authority of the father from homes. It alienated fathers from their children. It incentivized female-headed households. We've talked about this endlessly in this space. This is an old canard. This is old. This is old. This is an old hat. This is an old hat. This is old hat. Clarence Thomas was someone who thought that the government was not the solution to the problems of Black people. Clarence Thomas believed that government was always the problem of Black people, and that the government was in the way. The problem is this: the government was an impediment to the advancement of Black people. You see, Jim Crow was sustained by government. It was sustained by government. Segregation was sustained by government. Remember, slavery was sustained by government. And those historical experiences had taught people that government wasn't necessarily the friend of Black people. So why would you cry and call for the government to save you when the government has been the thing that has enslaved you? The government has been the thing that kept you behind a wall of apartheid called Jim Crow. So for Clarence Thomas, the government is the problem. And what Black people needed the most, from his perspective, was the government to leave black people alone. And here is where Clarence Thomas would quote someone like a Frederick Douglass. And Clarence Thomas has done this in his opinions. He's quoted Frederick Douglass, where Frederick Douglass says that we just, do nothing with us. This is Frederick Douglass. In terms of what should we do with the Negro, he was the question of Douglas's day. What shall we do with the Negro? And Douglas's response was, Frederick Douglass, that is to do nothing with us. In other words, leave us alone. Just leave us alone. Don't do anything with us. Get out of our way. Leave us alone. Let us determine our own fate. So Clarence Thomas had a problem with big government. And for this reason, Clarence Thomas was taken up by Ronald Reagan. Clarence Thomas became a member of the Reagan crew. He became a part of the Reagan administration with the EOC, and he was joined to the hip with other black people, rising black conservatives. There were other black conservatives who were also Reaganites in that particular period. There was the black economist who's still alive, who's still writing and teaching at Brown University, Glenn Loury. There's the black economist, the oldest of them all that everybody knows about, Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell was a part of the Reagan administration. He was a Reaganite. You also had Walter Williams, who was at George Mason University. He was an economist. Notice there was a whole bunch of economists. Reagan was able to attract a good number of black men who were economists, who were self-identified black conservatives. Black conservatives who did not believe that the government was the solution to the problems of black people. And that black people needed to engage in free enterprise. Here's the other thing, free enterprise. That if the government is to do anything, that the government is to ensure that there are no barriers to free enterprise when it comes down to black American advancement. Free enterprise. So Clarence Thomas, before he even becomes a Supreme Court justice, he has formed this philosophy. He has formed a point of view on government. He's formed a point of view on law, which I really haven't talked about too much, the Constitution, that becomes to mark who he is as a conservative. And let me add, so, he doesn't see black Americans, these people, they don't see black Americans as a group. People like Clarence Thomas, they refuse to see black Americans as a group under the law that the United States Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, recognizes individuals. The U.S. Constitution represents the rights of individuals. It does not represent, in their reading of the Constitution, it represents the rights of individuals, not the rights of groups. And the individual is abstract. It's the abstract individual. The individual isn't understood in terms of race, geography, class, or whatever. The individual is something that's abstract. So Clarence Thomas develops this conservative philosophy and ideology. When he's at the EEOC, he's working his way up. And he's around all these other black conservatives and what have you. He makes a name for himself in Washington, D.C. circles because he begins to expose his opinions get exposed. That's the whole documentary. But I guess, like I said, the books I shared with you guys, they detail all of that stuff. Now, let me just, I'm for the sake of this video, because I'm not going to be out here too long tonight, guys. For the sake of this video, Clarence Thomas has made it consistently clear, and this goes to the idea of an individual. Clarence Thomas went against the grain of Black American consensus. BGS is here. BGS knows I'm talking about. The Black conservatives in general, those people who came out publicly, Glenn Loury, those people who came out, people like Thomas Sowell, people like Walter Williams, those people were deliberately going against the Black American consensus in terms of politics. That at that particular time, like it is today, nothing has changed. At that particular time, like today, it was assumed that being a Black person was synonymous with being a political liberal or being a Democrat. It was just assumed. It was synonymous with that. And Clarence Thomas was not comfortable with that consensus. He defied that consensus. This idea that if you're a Black person, you have to vote. That means that you vote Democrat. If you're a Black person, you think a certain type of way over a range of issues. So if you're a Black person, you think one way about affirmative action or abortion or the markets or taxes or what have you, or the role of the government in general. If you're a Black person, you just think one way, which represented a consensus. If you are a Black person, you are automatically aligned either directly or indirectly with the NAACP or the Urban League or the Black American Church or the SCLC, the Southern Christian Conference, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, excuse me. You are automatically there. You have an automatic view on women, on feminism, so on and so forth. If you're a Black American, it is assumed that you're a liberal and that sort of thing. Jesse Jackson was one of the biggest. So Jesse Jackson, when Clarence Thomas is coming up, Jesse Jackson is one of the most important political figures in the country at that particular time. And it should be noted on the eve, right before he is introduced to the world, Clarence Thomas, right before he is introduced to the world in 1991 by George Herbert Walker Bush, Jesse Jackson has already ran for the U.S. presidency twice, 1984 and 1988. So if you're a Black American, it's assumed that you believe the same things that Jesse Jackson believes. And Clarence Thomas made it clear that he was not that type of guy. And I can't express to you how one is received by Black people when you go against the consensus. Now, so here's the thing. So, Clarence Thomas, he takes pride, and this is not it's pride, but it's even more than pride. But he makes it clear: I am a person, and I think the way I want to think, and no one tells me how to think. No one tells me what my politics ought to be. No one tells me what my politics ought to be. Jesse Jackson does not dictate my politics. The NAACP doesn't dictate my politics. The Urban League does not dictate my politics. The black academics in the universities all across America at that particular time who lean to the left or lean towards liberalism, they don't dictate my politics. My politics is over here. Their politics is over there. And I have to say, guy, that Clarence Thomas is the person, is the black conservative who is the face of a type of maverick approach to politics that puts him at odds against black people and black politics and liberal politics in general. He becomes the face of it. He is the face of black dissent, apart from political liberalism. And I have to say, guys, that's not an easy thing to do. That is not an easy thing to do. One thing that we learned about this guy right here, and again, we have to think about the fact that he was an outsider. One thing that we learn when you look at a figure like this, that this means when you take this type of stance, this means that you're putting yourself basically in opposition to millions and millions of black people in terms of your political orientation. And that means that you invite more vitriol. You invite more people to ostracize you. You invite more criticisms. You invite more opposition than you would otherwise get if you were on the liberal Democratic side. So why is all this significant, guys? Here's the thing, guys. And because of time, I'm not going to get into all the confirmation hearings and Anita Hill and all that kind of stuff, which is very juicy. Anita Hill, the sisterhood came for him. The sisterhood came for Clarence Thomas, guys. The sisterhood. The white and the black sisterhood came for Clarence Thomas. Okay. What was I saying? You have to understand that this is an individual who has lived out an uncompromising political stance for at least 40 years in public. An uncompromising, unwavering political stance. This is someone who was, again, here's the thing. So when he's nominated for the Supreme Court by George Herbert Walker Bush, this is when he found himself in front of a firing line. So here's the thing. when you go to 1991, when he is confirmed, or when you look at the confirmation hearings of 1991, and you look at what he had to deal with all the senators. Joe Biden was the leader. Joe Biden was there. Joe Kennedy was there. Strom Thurmond was there. Orrin Hatch was there. There were so many senators who were there who are no longer alive today. This is an individual who had guns aimed at him in a way that shaped what he would do and impact what he would do upon his confirmation on the Supreme Court. I'll put it like that. The level of scrutiny that he was subject to during the confirmation amplified much of the alienation that he had experienced in his younger life on his road to where he was going. That is that Clarence Thomas, when Clarence Thomas was under the gun during the confirmation hearings of 1991, it only echoed previous experiences when he was ostracized, when he was ridiculed, when he was criticized, when he was excluded from networks during his younger years, when black people treated him badly and when white people treated him badly. So you're talking about a man who at the age of 43, who had been living with wounds. This man had been living with wounds. 1991. He had lived with being a black male who was Negroid, the object of colorism. He was picked on. He wasn't a part of the in crowd. He went to the seminary. The white boys talked about him. Here's the other thing. He went to the seminary. The white boys talked about him. They called him the N-word. I didn't go into all that. He didn't quite fit in at Yale, even though he got into black politics. He got into radical black politics. He still didn't quite fit into radical black politics when he was at Holy Cross and at Yale. And when he finished his degree at Yale, he felt lost because there was no world immediately open to him. There was the promises of liberalism. The promises of liberalism had not materialized for him. That's the way to put it. The promises of liberalism had not materialized for him once he graduated from Yale with a law degree. So this is a man who had all these experiences of being beaten down. And he had these wounds. So 1991, he's at the confirmation hearings. And he gets to the point in the confirmation hearings where he is close to being confirmed. Here's the thing. Clarence Thomas had gone through these confirmations. He had gone through damn near 90% of the confirmation hearings. And it was clear that he was on his way to being nominated. It was clear he was on his way to being nominated I'm sorry, not nominated. He was on his way to being confirmed. He was already nominated. He was on his way to being confirmed as a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And at the last minute, and at the last single minute, Anita Hill, who was then a professor at Oklahoma State University, she was in a law school. She had been a former employee of Clarence Thomas when he worked at the EEOC. At the last minute, it was the midnight. It was the last minute. I'm inclined to say it was the knock at midnight. Let me tell you what happened with Anita Hill. Anita Hill, there had been a rumor. There had been a rumor. Clarence Thomas was being investigated by the FBI. There were all type of investigations. You know, when people are nominated for those high positions, they do all type of investigations into your personal background. They talk to all your friends and the people that you know. Do you know how the Anita Hill? Do you know how the Anita Hill situation came about? The Anita Hill situation emerged because someone had heard at a party. Someone overheard someone at a party talk about Clarence Thomas, and the person said that he had some sexual harassment issues at his time at EOC, that there were apparently some women that he was harassing. It was at a party. Somebody investigated the hearsay. The federal investigator went and did a follow-up. They talked to the source at the party. They identified the person who was the object of the hearsay, which was Anita Hill. And this federal investigator contacted Anita Hill and had some communication with Anita Hill. And Anita Hill was asked to write a statement about her experience with Clarence Thomas, and she wrote a statement about her experience with Clarence Thomas. After she submitted the statement was placed in the file, and when decisions were made as to whether they would follow up on it, the investigators decided to not follow up on the statement that Anita Hill had made. How did Anita Hill get into it? So, someone who was an aide of Senator Joe Kennedy, somebody who was an aide of Joe Kennedy heard about Anita Hill at the midnight hour. And the person who was an aide of Joe Kennedy pulled some strings, and they brought Anita Hill in, and they talked to her, and then they set up a time for her to testify before the Senate committee. That's how Anita Hill found herself before that Senate Judiciary Committee. She didn't just volunteer this information. Somebody went digging and they pulled her in. But she did consent. She did consent. She did agree. She didn't have to. She wasn't subpoenaed. She could have just said that she didn't want to follow it, or she said that she didn't want to talk about it. She could have did all that kind of stuff. But she agreed to do that, and she testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm sorry, Ted Kennedy. That was Ted Kennedy. Thank you, John Smith. Thank you, Christopher Clipper. That was Ted Kennedy. That was Ted Kennedy. His people. His people brought Anita Hill in. And they turned that Senate, it was turned into, they took a confirmation hearing. They took a serious confirmation hearing, and they turned it into a circus. They turned it into a clown show. They turned it into a clown show. It was big TV. It's kind of like, you know how Trump right now, Donald Trump is big TV. Donald Trump is like, for ratings, like CNN. Donald Trump just did this town hall with CNN, and their ratings are like, you know, going through the roof and stuff like that. It's like that. It's like whenever Donald Trump does a debate, all the stations, you know, they you know, whoever hosts the debate, their ratings go up. It was tabloid. It was tabloid stuff. Now, here's the thing about the sexual harassment. Now, here's the thing. According to Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas, he didn't touch her. He didn't make any physical advances towards her. I want you to get this here. What was the harassment? The harassment was that he used pornographic language with her. According to her, they talked about pornography. He was talking about porn. Stuff that you watch. And he talked about porn in a suggestive way. If you go back and watch it, and you go back to her testimony, he never asked her to do anything with him sexually. Basically, what he did, according to her, was talk dirty. It was like dirty talk. He was just talking about porn. Or he said stuff to her that was sexually suggestive, which was intended to see how she would react. At any rate, it's Ted Kennedy. That's right, because that's right. That's pubic hair in my coat. That's exactly what it is. Now, now, can you imagine? I want y'all to go back and look at this now. I want y'all to go back now. This is the second black male, to be nominated to the United States Supreme Court. He's 43 years old. The Senate is lily white, nothing but white senators. Lily white. This stuff is this is nationwide television. Everybody is glued to it. Everybody is watching this. Everybody is glued to their seats watching this all over the United States of America with their TVs, color TVs, black and white TVs. Everybody is watching it. Everybody is watching. This is the first time something of this nature has ever taken place in a nomination hearing, in a confirmation hearing, excuse me. This is the first time. And this is the first time that in a confirmation hearing on public television, where you have somebody who has been nominated to the Supreme Court who's being accused of sexual harassment. And look at this. This man becomes the face, Clarence Thomas, in 1991 as a result of Anita Hill's testimony. Clarence Thomas, for an entire generation and for subsequent generations, he became the face of sexual harassment. Clarence Thomas became the face of sexual harassment. Something like this had not happened to any other political figure in public. No other one. They put it on a black man. Now, I want you to think about the weight of all that on a black man. A man who was deeply wounded already. And I want you to think about all the Machiavellian forces that were arrayed against him. I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about that, and I want you to juxtapose that against 33 years later, after he is confirmed in who he is right now. You all know the story about how he responded. You all know the story about how he responded to those accusations. And you all know what happened. Clarence Thomas went into that confirmation hearing after her testimony that following day. And he looked at those senators. He looked at those senators. And Clarence Thomas gave those senators in the most regal way manner. He gave them the riot. He read them the riot act, okay? He read them the riot act. And he said, this is a clown show. This is preposterous. This is disrespectful. And he told them, he told them what he thought about what they were doing. And you all know those classic words that he said. He said to them, he said, this is a high-tech lynching of a black person. Now, brothers, I just want you to let it sink in. I want you to just allow the impact. Just put yourself in the shoes of this individual. And I want you to think about how that impacts a person, an experience like that. There was no guarantee that he was going to be confirmed after Anita Hill. There was no guarantee that he was going to be confirmed after Anita Hill. No guarantee. And he denied all of the accusations. He denied, Clarence Thomas denied all of the accusations. He denied them. He flatly denied the accusations. And it's important to know, that he would have been subject to perjury. He would have been subject, both of them actually, lying before a judicial body. So you can be subject to perjury. They can lose their law license. You can be fined and all that kind of stuff. If it's found that you have perjured yourself, you find that you have lied about your testimony. But he denied everything. Let me just get into it. So Clarence Thomas, I need to fast forward because I don't want to be here forever. I submit to you guys that moment, that Anita Hill moment that he had, I think that might have been the straw. That might have been the thing that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. In terms of his toughness, in terms of him being an uncompromising man. This stream is called the Untouchable High Value Man. The Untouchable High Value Man. I submit to you that when Clarence Thomas was eventually confirmed, that the confirmation and him being named a Supreme Court justice and him going through that experience, I am convinced that compelled him to only amplify or to magnify his own convictions about law and politics. If you think that this man had a hard time with political liberalism before the confirmation, if you think that this man has some disagreements with civil rights politics before the confirmation, his angst, his distaste for political liberalism and everything it represents, and his animus towards what he regards as the limits or failures of civil rights, that just went to a completely different level. And I submit to you is that is when Clarence Thomas became Mr. Untouchable. He became Mr. Untouchable. Because now he is a United States Supreme Court justice. The appointment is for life. He can only be removed through impeachment. He can only be removed through death. Through death or impeachment. Through death, retirement, through death, retirement, and impeachment. Thank you, Eli Sanyinka, for that cash app. Thank you, Arthur Dean, for that cash app. Thank you. We're talking about Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas became Mr. Untouchable because now he's on the Supreme Court at the age of 43. No one can remove him. It's a job for life. It's a job for life. Let me tell you something, guys. The world of the Supreme Court, and I'll even say the world of America in 1991 is not the world of the Supreme Court and the world of America in 2023. Clarence Thomas in 2023 is 100 times more, and I'm being generous and conservative, Clarence Thomas in 2023 is 100 times more than what he was in 1991. And I'm talking about power. I'm talking about influence. I'm not saying these things to celebrate him. I'm not saying these things to turn him into any type of hero or anything like that. I'm saying we're talking about a high-value black man, an untouchable black man. And the world has had to, here's the thing, here's what makes him untouchable. Over the decades that he has rendered opinions consistently and written opinions over decades, he has forced this country to deal with him on his own terms. He refused to change. He refused to change for the liberals. He refused to change for his critics. He remained consistent. He never wavered. And he's forced those people, he's forced them to reckon with who he is. And his influence over the decades. And to deal with the impact of the high-value network that he's been a part of. This is why you have the documentary out right now. This is why you have a whole bunch of opinion pieces that are think pieces that are circulating about Clarence Thomas right now. This is why you have a whole bunch of people all over the place saying he needs to be impeached. This is why you got so many people trying to make connections between him and billionaires and are saying that he's been taking bribes and he's taking money under the table and that sort of thing, and that he is engaging in misconduct in terms of commingling the powers with the Supreme Court, with outside forces and entities. They're doing this because he's high value. They're doing it because he's a high value target. And he has produced value. Here's the thing, Thomas has produced value increasingly with each passing decade. I don't agree with his opinions. I don't agree with much of his judicial philosophy. I don't share his view of the United States Constitution, but high value is high value. High value is high value. It doesn't matter what his politics is. High value is high value. He has exponentially increased his stock as a high value man with each passing decades, and he is untouchable. And all of the metrics that Kevin Samuels laid out, I did this in the beginning of the video, all of the metrics that Kevin Samuels laid out in terms of what is a high value man, Clarence Thomas meets every metric and then some. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to have to wrap up real soon. I'm going to say this. Kevin Samuels talks about the network. I'm going to tell you one thing that Clarence Thomas has done consistently throughout his career is that Clarence Thomas has been affiliated with networks. Networks. Clarence Thomas attached himself to networks of conservatives who saw eye to eye with him in terms of ideology and judicial philosophy. These people have gone hard in the paint with and for him. He is darn near a god among them. But when you look at his career, you can't but help but notice the high value networks. You can't help but notice the fact that when he discovered the people who were open to him, when he discovered networks of people that were open to him, he dove in head first into those networks. He dove in head first. And he's protected. Kevin Samuels didn't talk too much about it, protection, but he's protected. He's not gonna get impeached. I don't care what anyone, he's not gonna get impeached. He's untouchable. I'm telling you right now, Clarence Thomas is an untouchable black man. And I don't care what you think about Clarence Thomas's politics. You don't have to think too much of it. But I'm going to tell you guys, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn about this individual. There's a lot to learn. I have an entire chapter in my book that I've just completed that deals with Clarence Thomas and his legacy. And again, I don't share his political conservatism. I don't share his judicial philosophy, but I know what his legacy is. And I know what his legacy is going to mean for the next several decades, even beyond my lifetime, in terms of what the Supreme Court is right now and what law is going to be in the future from the standpoint of the Supreme Court. And if you think that you can't learn anything from somebody you disagree with, if you think you cannot learn anything from someone who you are ideologically at odds with, particularly if that person has been successful with what they have done with their life and their career and their networks and influence, and I don't know what to tell you. I think you need to reassess your priorities in life. If you can't learn from people who are diametrically opposed to you, but people who have a paradigm, who have a paradigm of success that they've lived out, and you can see the patterns, you can see the influences, and you can see the turns. That's what you do. How many of us are willing to stand on what we believe to be true and right? How many of us are willing to stand upon what we believe to be true and right, and to not waver from what we believe to be true and right? How many of us are willing to do that? How many of us are willing to do that in the face of being seen as unpopular? Thank you, Justin Harris, for that super chat, for that cash app. Thank you for that. Arthur Dean, thank you for that cash app. We appreciate you. Nana, thank you for that. Thank you, guys. Thank you. This is an uncompromising black man who has withstood mountains and mountains of criticism his entire life. And this man stayed the course. He stayed committed to whatever, to his vision and his idea of what his purpose is in life. And now the world is having to contend with his influence. The world is having to contend with the influence of Clarence Thomas that no one anticipated 32 years ago, 32 years ago. No one anticipated. No one anticipated. Remember, this is the guy who was an outsider. This is the guy who was demonized, who was ostracized. This is the guy who people crapped on. People crapped on him, okay? And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to wrap this thing up. He didn't forget what happened to him during that confirmation hearing. He did not forget what happened to him during that confirmation hearing in 1991. He did not forget the people who, we're talking about long memory. He did not forget about the people who came after him in 1991. I haven't even talked about his wife and who she represents, but he did not forget about the people who came after him in 1991. This guy, we're talking about long memory. And whether they want to admit it, and whether they want to admit it or not, the people who gave him the most hell have to admit, the people who gave him the most hell have to admit that this man is having the last laugh. They're having the last laugh. He's having the last laugh. There are some people who have speculated. Glenn Lowry, the economist, there's some people who were speculating that he's gotten his enemies back. There's some people through the law. There's some people. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I don't think he's using the law to punish people out of vindictiveness or whatever. I think what he has done with law is consistent with his conservative beliefs. However, one has to stand back and say, you know what? All these people are having to eat cake now. Anita Hill, someone sent Anita Hill, and she voluntarily went out there. She voluntarily went out there and helped create the circus in 1991. That's the only accomplishment. Here's the thing, guys. This is the greatest accomplishment this woman has in life. No one knows Anita Hill about anything other than the fact that she did this testimony in 1991 at this confirmation hearing. That's what the world knows her for. This is the woman who testified about Clarence Thomas and sexual harassment, 1991. This man is now a legendary Supreme Court justice. Anita Hill, where you at now? Where you at? And where these other people at? Oh yeah, and by the way, Joe Biden was the leader now. Joe Biden was the ringleader. Joe Biden, who now is the president of the United States, he was the ringleader. And Joe Biden has had to contend. Joe Biden has had to contend with the impact of Clarence Thomas. Because I'm sure Joe Biden did not anticipate that the center of gravity would be Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Anyway, guys, there's so much more that I would love to unpack. Passport OG, thank you for that. Passport OG, thank you for that. There's so much more I would love to unpack, guys. So much more. I've gone over 2 hours. But I want to put this out here because I've been thinking about this for a very, very long time. We talk about high value black men. We talk about black men independence. We talk about black men's agency. We talk about black men's happiness. We talk about all these things. But it's important to put It's important to put some context on it. It's important to put some context on it. It's important that we talk about the meat and relate it to what's going on in our world. And like I said, there are so many profound lessons to be gained by studying people's lives like Clarence Thomas. Like I say, I have my points of agreement. I have my points of disagreement with the man. Politically and in terms of the U.S. Constitution, how he reads the Constitution. But I'm going to tell you guys, if you're a black man who knows, if any black man who has been treated like a pariah, any black man who has had to deal not only with alienation and ostracism from white people, but also black people. Any black man who has taken hell not only from white people, but you have also taken hell from black people, and the hell that you have taken from black people goes all the way into your childhood. Any black man who has experienced that can identify with those parts in Clarence Thomas's life. Any black man who seeks to take an uncompromising position, an uncompromising perspective, knowing that that perspective is going to render you unpopular, that it might cost you friends. I've taken positions, I hold positions right now that have costed friends and acquaintances. That there are people I don't deal with anymore because of positions that I take right now, especially on this black male independent stuff. I'm gonna tell you guys, I've lost connections and acquaintances because of the stuff I do about black men. Because this stuff is seen as unpopular. And it is unpopular. But I'm 10 toes down on this unpopular stuff. Because I have convictions about what I'm doing. And what we're doing right here. And that this perspective that I have is an uncompromising perspective. And I've thought through my ideas. I've thought through all this stuff. So yes, this man, he broke ranks with black consensus. This man broke ranks under the guise of conservatism. He broke ranks with the black consensus. And you have to have fortitude, you have to have balls to do stuff like that and to stand on it. Anyway, guys, I've been here too long, man. This is a Friday night. You guys have so many things to do, man. So many things to do. I appreciate you guys vibing and tuning in with me and everything. I'm glad I got to talk about this because, like I said, when I started this broadcast, I've been wanting to talk about Clarence Thomas for a long time. Now, I just tell you, I want to spend some time talking about some of these black conservatives. I want to put some context on black conservatism. We need to do some do some historical work on Black conservatism. Because we need to discuss exactly what is Black conservatism. And I want to talk about Black conservatism not because I identify myself as a Black conservative. I want to do it because there are Black men who do identify as conservative, and because Black people have had historically a conservative orientation towards many things. That Black people have been socially conservative, and that you can't get around the influence of conservatism on Black people. It just is what it is. So that's coming in the future. So y'all stay tuned to that. Anyways, brothers, I want you guys to enjoy what's left of your Friday night. This is the Mad Professor Friday Night Live. Be safe out there. Watch out for the sharks and watch out for the piranhas, guys. Watch out for the vampires. Watch out for the vampires, okay? They out there. But I'm going to check out, and I look forward to vibing with you real soon. So enjoy your Friday night. Hold on, I got one more. Thank you, Cyril Roger. Good to see you, man. Good to see you, man. Appreciate your outreach. I understand how this is not an easy topic for man. Hey, man. Yeah, man. We have to take these risks. We have to take these risks, guys. We have to take these risks. We got to do it. We can't run away from hard stuff, guys. Yeah, we got to bring it back. We got to bring it back. We have to do it. Thank you for that support, my brothers. Thank you for my support, my brothers. So anywho, guys, I'm up out of here. I'll check you all next time around. Peace out.